What are true American values and how important are they? Well, according to our guest today, chaos will result on an unprecedented scale if we forget our American heritage and the values on which our country was founded. We'll talk about that and more, and what he calls the American Trinity, next on Significant Insights. Hello and welcome to Significant Insights. I'm Jerry Rose. And I'm thrilled to be bringing you my recent conversation with radio host, columnist, and best-selling author Dennis Prager. Dennis has lectured on all 7 continents and 45 states and in 9 of Canada's 10 provinces. His latest book is Still the Best Hope: Why the World Needs American Values to Triumph. In the book, Dennis contends that humanity confronts a monumental choice between American values and 2 other opposing systems of rule, Islamism and European-style democratic socialism. And he argues that the American system is still the best hope for peace and prosperity. We start with Dennis' explanation of the core of American values, what he calls the American Trinity.
Americanism has an American Trinity. What I call the American Trinity. It's on every coin. Liberty, in God we trust, E Pluribus Unum. The left prefers egalitarianism to liberty, secularism to In God we trust, and multiculturalism to E Pluribus Unum, from many one. So you have a conflict on the most basic values. Even simpler, the American idea is unnatural. The leftist idea is natural. I don't mean by natural law, just natural, comporting with human nature. Why? Humans want to be taken care of. The American value system said you take care of others. The leftist value system is you are taken care of. What do most people yearn for? To be taken care of. And that's why it's an uphill battle. America is an aberration.
Doesn't it go with being taken care of that somebody also controls?
Doesn't matter.
If you're taken care of, people control.
They control you.
Yeah.
That's correct. The more you're taken care of, the more you're controlled. The average Swede doesn't care.
And that's what we've seen in the European experience.
That's right.
The social
That is
democracy
correct.
and so forth.
See, it's a blanket. People like blankets. They don't want to warm themselves, take care of themselves, and feel obligated. Then you have to take care of a family, you have to take care of your parents, your children, your neighbor, your community. This is what Americans did. The Kiwanis Club took care of everybody. So you now have the state instead of the Kiwanis Club.
If it's unnatural, why was it so successful?
It was so successful because it's right. It works. And so the question really is, how did it get started if it's unnatural? Exceptional people founded this country. That's all I can say. I very rarely invoke the divine in human affairs because we can't say, we don't know. We mortals don't know for sure when God acts and doesn't. But the founding of the United States comes as close to a divine act, with the actors of that time all God-centered, with the exception of Tom Paine, all Franklin, Washington, Jefferson, Adams, and they are depicted. In my book, I show from Franklin's autobiography how profoundly God-centered he was. His basic credo is my basic credo, and I'm considered a religious man, in my case, a religious Jew. And that is that, among other things, there is a God who is sovereign in the world, who directs the affairs of the world. That doesn't mean there's no freedom of choice, but is the ultimate director. And the beauty judges each nation and each individual after death. This is Franklin from his own autobiography, and he's called a deist.
And that's why the leftists have to attack each of those aspects of American culture.
Yes, leftism is the antithesis.
Religion,
liberty. Yes, and E Pluribus Unum. They prefer. This is a new thing in America, that people are broken into groups. Americans were Americans. It didn't matter if your last name was Rodriguez or Cohen or whatever. Who cares? You're an American. Not now. A woman runs for Senate for Massachusetts, 132nd Indian. It was a lie, but even if it was true, Harvard Law School listed her as the first American Indian to have a tenure as a law professor. It's insulting.
You talk about American values in your book. Describe what you see as American values.
American values is the American Trinity, liberty, which means, first and foremost, that the state, whether it's a king or a democratically elected government, is out of my life as much as possible. Then I am free. That's liberty. But liberty is dependent upon the second of the three, God, because if I am not accountable to the state, since I am not basically good, that was the founders all understood that. We're not basically good, we human beings. So if we're not accountable to the state, we better be accountable to God. Because you got to be accountable to something. Society will not work ethically and morally if people are not accountable for their behavior to something higher than themselves. It's either going to be the state or God. They believe liberty depends upon God. And they were right. And Europe is a perfect example. The bigger the state, the smaller the God. And that's what's happening in America.
So let's talk about the European culture, social democracy. It's obvious through what's happening with the European Union that it's not working. And yet we're looking at the possibility, the potential, of trading American values for a European type of model. Why are we buying into that?
The left doesn't care if it works. It's a religion.
What's the end game, Dennis?
The end game, it's all in their minds, because they would rebel. They would not like the end game if they actually lived it. But the end game is complete equality, taken care of totally, and there's nobody richer. A deep, deep envy resides in the bowels of leftism. A real resentment of people having more materially than they do. It's a purely materialist outlook.
It's a purely mythical.
It is, well, it's a religion. Leftism, as I have written and believe fully, is the most dynamic, has been the most dynamic religion in the world in the last 100 years, much more so, unfortunately, than Christianity, more so even than Islam, certainly more so than my religion, Judaism, or Buddhism or Hinduism. Leftism is by far the most dynamic religion.
We'll have more with Dennis Prager when we return.
Americans have taken for granted we'll just go on being free and prosperous. But liberty and prosperity are not left-wing goals. The left wants equality, not prosperity.
Welcome back. Today, our guest is radio talk show host Dennis Prager. Before the break, we were talking about what Dennis calls the American Trinity of values: liberty, in God we trust, and E Pluribus Unum, which means out of many, one. Now here's part two of our conversation. You talk about exceptionalism. You talk about American values, which means exceptionalism, correct?
Well, they are exceptional values. There's no other country with liberty in God we trust, E Pluribus Unum.
But in order for the leftists to achieve their goal, there can be no exceptionalism. And they don't accept exceptionalism. They don't accept the American values.
Yes, America is the greatest threat to leftism in the world. It's the most religious Western country, and it thrives. It's the most capitalist Western country, and it thrives. And it's the most E Pluribus Unum country, melding people into a melting pot. They hate the term melting pot. They hate in God we trust, and they hate small government. And America has had small government, a melting pot, and God-centered society, and thrived. So this exceptional country is the greatest threat to the leftist belief. It's why the world left hates America.
Do you consider this administration leftist?
This is the most left-wing administration in American history. This is the first true leftist in the presidency.
And it has successfully won an election because of the natural response
The natural
of the
response to
population?
being taken care of.
Are we seeing
and
a
the
shift in our culture?
Yes, we're seeing a shift in our culture, but I need to emphasize also because of the failure of conservatives, of mainstream Americans to educate the next generation in Americanism. Progressivism, which came from Germany in the late 19th century, the professors came from Germany, or American professors studied in Germany, where they got the ideas of socialism and big government. It had already taken root. Woodrow Wilson was a progressivist, was a progressive. So this battle has been since the beginning of the 20th century, and we Americans have taken for granted we'll just go on being free and prosperous. But liberty and prosperity are not left-wing goals. The left wants equality, not prosperity.
So, with that in mind, let's look at the potential. And I like your book, Still the Best Hope, the title of the book, but let's look at the potential progression of this. If in fact these values are not values that the left can accept in order to achieve their agenda, then the economic downfall of America could be in fact to their advantage because basically exceptionalism has to go out the window because of the internationalism. Is that part of this? That America, in the leftist mentality, that America become part of or more like a European model and become part of a European model of an expanded...
They say it. It's not my or your interpretation. They say it. The model is Western Europe.
But it's a failing model.
First of all, they don't believe Europe is failing. They don't. So, but number two, even if it is, so we'll do it better. That's all. They're true believers. That's why for a true believer, the notion of, well, they're failing, it's like the real Marxist say, well, all Marxist regimes were totalitarian. They didn't practice it right. Leftism will sink under the weight of its own debt and large government. They don't care.
You say that still the best hope is American values, and this value system worldwide, not just in America.
That's right.
But worldwide.
Yes.
That's the only thing that will finally, in the final analysis, work.
American values are the best value system devised. Those three things. You mentioned, for example, nationalism. That's the third one. Remember, E Pluribus Unum, from many one. We don't care about your ethnicity. We don't care about your blood. We don't care about your religious background, your race. We care that you affirm American values. I have done the test with conservatives who were called racist because the left calls us all six-herb, sexist, intolerant, xenophobic, homophobic, Islamophobic, racist, and bigoted. That's their answer to all conservative arguments. So I have asked 500 people at a time, raise your hand if you would vote for a black president and black vice president if they had conservative values. Every hand goes up. Versus 2 whites. Raise your hand if you would like 9 black female justices of the Supreme Court if they were conservative. Every hand goes up in the most conservative audiences. Black and female. I've even done black, female, and lesbian, and all the hands go up. We care about values. And that's it. We don't care about race. We don't care about gender. They do. They have substituted the classic Christian trinity at universities with the leftist trinity of race, gender, class. That's the prism through which your kids for $50,000 a year learn about life.
Is that the biggest consensus in America? What we're seeing on the university campuses is still the American center, conservative center, strong enough to win the battle?
Well, it doesn't look like it. I'm not going to fill you with the false optimism. I'm not yet pessimistic, but I can't say that I'm particularly optimistic.
Did this last election?
The last election affirmed the dire straits with which Americanism finds itself.
You feel like, you believe the leftists understand that, and they're beginning to capitalize more and more?
Well, of course.
And that immigration is part of that?
Everything is part of it. And look, if you have children from kindergarten in Chicago, they are starting sex education now in kindergarten. If you have children from kindergarten through graduate school, and you can mold their minds, and there's minimal ability to be exposed to the other side, you'll win.
What should conservatives do to combat it?
First, you got to know what we stand for, that you should be able to be awakened at 3 a.m. and recite the American Trinity. That's why I wrote my book. It's got 400 footnotes. It's a lifetime of work since I was at the Russian Institute and studying the left at Columbia University. This is my life in that book. Americanism, Leftism, Islamism. The three possible futures of mankind. The parts on Islamism are also very important for Americans.
I wish we had more time, because the whole subject of Islam and the leftist attitude, actually more tolerance.
Well, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yeah. The left puts up this major barrier to any criticism, the most moral and decent criticism. You can say anything about Christianity, you could say nothing about Islam.
Again, the book is Still the Best Hope by Dennis Prager. And you can find out more about Dennis by going to DennisPrager.com.